don't start webinar first. Okay, maximum. Then you pause recording first. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, for the Utilizing Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership RCEP webinar. This webinar will be held today and tomorrow. For the speakers today, we have Ms. Liz Chelliah from Ministry of Trade and Industry, Principal Trade Specialist, to share with us on the overview of the RCEP agreement. Following her, we have Ms. Ivy Heng, Assistant Director for the International Policy Engagement Team at SBF, to share with us RCEP Trade in Goods chapter and also do a sharing on the tariff finder. We will end off the webinar with a question and answer session. So please type down your questions in the Q&A box below. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Ms. Liz Chelliah for her sharing.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Rahini, for the kind introduction. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes telling you what RCEP is about and why businesses should pay attention to RCEP. Next slide, please. So what is RCEP? RCEP is a FTA that covers 15 markets. So it's 15 countries, 15 markets. The 15 markets are highlighted in this slide. It is ASEAN, which is the central core for the RCEP agreement, followed by all the then existing dialogue partners. So you have China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. I will explain later on in the slides what is the situation with India, because India was part of the negotiations over the years. It's just that when it came to the time for them to start doing their domestic ratification and see whether they could enter into force, they had a bit of a change of mind. I will elaborate a bit more further. So why is RCEP important? So this is the journey. So if you, sorry, you can go back to the next slide. Sorry, Rahidi. So for the journey, so why did we even start RCEP? I'm not sure whether some of y'all in your businesses would recall that there have been some complaints up to 2010, 2011 about the spaghetti bowl of rules of origin and other rules, because it was all bilateral type of FTAs. Even at ASEAN, it was an ASEAN +1. So what we had in ASEAN China, for example, may not actually be exactly the same as what was in ASEAN Korea, ASEAN Japan, or ASEAN Australia, New Zealand. So it was becoming difficult for parties to know which was the best FTA to use depending on the market. And for Singapore business, because the Singapore government, we have done so many more bilateral FTAs, it was becoming a bit confusing, and there was a complaint about a spaghetti bowl. So governments in the Asia Pacific arena decided that we will start to work on a free trade area of the Asia Pacific, or as I like to say, making lasagna out of this spaghetti bowl by having a bigger participating group in the FTA. So RCEP is the FTA that was led by ASEAN, because it's ASEAN plus all the dialogue partners. Now, it's important to remember that it is an ASEAN centrality FTA, and not like what some of the Western media like to say, it is China-led. RCEP was to complement the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was US-led, which I think is why some people, now in the height of the US-China tensions, like to say TPP US, RCEP China, but that's not true. Whilst TPP was indeed initially run by the US, RCEP was never run by China. It has always been ASEAN in the central seat, and that's why the chief negotiator for the entire RCEP negotiations was from an ASEAN member state, Pak Iman from Indonesia. So this is just a brief timeline to show how we finally agreed as to what will be the contents. That was in August 2012, after a lot of discussions, what will be in RCEP, and everyone agreed that it had to be better than what was in the +1 agreements. In November 2012, we formally launched it, and in 2013, negotiations started. We ended and concluded negotiations in 2019, and that was the point in time where India decided that due to a lot of domestic issues going on, PM Modi had just lost one state election, and agriculture subsistence being a very key issue in India, and there were fears about a surge of imports from China. India took the decision that although the agreement was done in a way to meet a lot of India's concerns and offensive interests, they decided to step out. Hopefully it's just temporary, as I will elaborate later on in the slide. So notwithstanding the hit by COVID in 2020, which required a lot of the domestic ratification and then the discussions as to how RCEP will enter into force to take place virtually, by November 2020, this agreement was signed, and in January 2022, it entered into force. So next slide, please. So just again to recap on this, because it's quite important, that it is 30% of the world's GDP, which means that there is a lot of potential business coming from this area, especially as if you note and read all the global reports now, although yes, the world is in a bit of a recession, this part of Southeast Asia is doing much better, and you have a lot of positive growth coming from our neighbors. Positive growth, that means positive potential for all of y'all to see how you can use RCEP to become competitive and entrench your business in this region. So RCEP has entered into force now for everybody except the Philippines. Philippines has already completed their domestic ratification, but they have yet to submit this document to the ASEAN Secretariat. And after they do so, after 60 days of doing so, it will enter into force for them. And so we hope that this will be no later than late May, early June, preferably earlier. Next slide, please. So why all the fuss about RCEP? RCEP, as you can see, covers 20 chapters. It covers a lot of newer issues that have not been covered in the ASEAN +1 or even within the ASEAN agreements. For example, government procurement. We also have economic and technical cooperation done on a broader scheme. We have in one space now all the rules on origin, for regulations on services, what do you do for standards and conformance, for SPS. So basically, as I said, it is making lasagna, because now all the 15 countries in RCEP will be bound by the same rule encapsulated in this 20 chapters. Next slide, please. So just to give you an overview as to what is new for the ASEAN trade agreements, as I said, intellectual property, government procurement, and electronic commerce. Whilst we are not touching on any of this for today's and tomorrow's seminar, it is important to actually pay attention to the intellectual property chapter in it, because as you are exporting your goods into the RCEP region, the IP chapter allows you to protect your IP in these products as well. So please take a look at that. And if there's interest, we can always do another standalone webinar on intellectual property. Next slide, please. So as all of you businesses run your businesses differently, you need to unfortunately roll up your sleeves and look to see how the RCEP agreement applies to your company. My colleague later on, Ivy, will explain to you about how the tariff reduction is taking place. And if you are already using one of the +1 agreements or even Artiga, you need to see whether the market access preference in RCEP is better than what you're currently getting, or even if it's not better, to assess whether maybe you can better use the RCEP agreement to enter these markets, because they have much more liberal rules of origin criteria compared even to Artiga and the and definitely compared to the +1 agreements. We have put in new provisions on process rules like chemical reaction rules, and we have a wider coverage of alternative tariff shift rules. So just because you are able to use the RVC criteria, for example, in Artiga, doesn't mean that you should not pay attention to what RCEP will offer you, because going down the road, you yourself might prefer to move towards a more easier to meet origin criteria than one that is so dependent on global market prices. If you are not clear as to how and what RCEP means to your business, please feel free to reach out to us at the Singapore Business Federation, Enterprise Singapore, Singapore Customs, and my colleagues and myself at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, because we are here to help guide you to use this very important pathway. If you are facing challenges, please feedback to us, because if you don't do so, we will not know what we need to address in making sure that the agreement runs as smooth as possible for all of you. Next slide, please. So as I said, there are now 15 countries in this agreement. The RCEP also provides for a session, and the agreement shall be open for a session 18 months after the entry into force of this agreement. So since the agreement entered into force in January last year, accession processes will be open later this year, and parties are already trying to discuss what will be the modality and the rules for such accession. At the moment, we only have Hong Kong who has shown interest in acceding to RCEP. And so we will wait to see, once the criteria is publicized, who else may be interested, because there may be clarity at that stage whether you already need to be a dialogue partner, which is Hong Kong, or whether it'll be open to any other country, for example, UK or even Canada, who wants to maybe accede to and do business with the RCEP parties via RCEP rather than doing a one-on-one dialogue partner agreement. So just watch this space. There was sure to be a press release about this sometime in June or July this year. Next slide, please. Now to round up, I was just going to talk to you about India. India is a founding member of RCEP. So if India decides to come back to RCEP, they do not need to be part of the accession process, because they already are part, they negotiated it, everything is there as to what they wanted. The question now is if and when India is ready to come back. India, if you read through a lot of the other commentaries, is being courted by many other countries. And so our personal desire is for India to reprioritize this region as their market, to not be so concerned about potential conflict of interest with China in terms of surge of Chinese imports, because you can see all of us in ASEAN have been able to grapple with that, and we are much smaller economies than India. So we hope that India will be able to come back. Again, we are hoping it'll be sometime later this year. So this is just a brief overview to guide you and to show you as to why you should be paying attention to this agreement, even if you're already using one of the existing FTAs for one of the 15 markets. I thank you, and I hand you over now to my colleague, and we can address any questions you may have later on in the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, for your very informative sharing on the RCEP agreement. I'm sure your slide on the key takeaways is very useful for the businesses. Next up, I would like to invite Ms. Ivy Heng for her sharing on the Trade in Goods chapter and the tariff finder.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Liz, for sharing an overview of RCEP. Ivy Heng, Assistant Director of the Free Trade Agreement team in Singapore Business Federation. And for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be sharing on RCEP, Trade in Goods, and also tariff finder, which I think it will be a very useful tool for Singapore businesses, and also some FTA resources to help in your FTA journey. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just now Liz has actually briefly shared about the RCEP journey, and I would like to re-highlight again for Philippines. They have yet to deposit the instrument of ratification to the Secretariat of ASEAN. And hence the earliest enter into force date, like Liz mentioned, could be end May 2023, or which is 60 days from now. Of course, we hope that they ratified as soon as possible. We would like to encourage all the businesses here who are interested in the Philippine markets to actually start your due diligence now to check if there are preferential advantage. And as soon as it enters into force, you can actually use it. And there's no need to wait for you then to start your research. Next slide, please. So I would like to highlight over here that RCEP actually offers an alternative towards the existing ASEAN agreement. And actually, as you understand, that Singapore, we have a wide network of free trade agreement, which actually provide choices, flexibilities, and opportunities to our businesses. Hence, I think it's very important to check and compare the RCEP tariff schedules and the ROO, which is the rules of origin, against other Singapore FTAs in that sense, you can determine which FTA is actually most suitable for your product to obtain a preferential treatment to that particular or specific market. So when should you use RCEP? So Liz also mentioned previously on the market access. So when RCEP actually offers better preferential tariff rates for your products as compared to other FTA, perhaps compared to other RCEP plus FTAs, or compared to when you're not using an FTA at all. And rules of origin. So what is this rules of origin? They are actually criteria that your products has to meet or fulfill in order to confirm an originating status as in a Singapore origin product. So when it is easier for your product to qualify as an origin product, there is like, you can consider accumulation and also whether the PSR rule, which is the product specific rule, is more suitable for a product, and also whether the proof of origin is flexible or not. So Singapore Customs, our speakers for Singapore Customs will be sharing more on this tomorrow as well. Next slide. So based on this slide, you can see that in a typical pricing model, so are you aware that which category that FTA can actually potentially reduce or eliminated? So as you see on the right side, so the custom duties is one category that FTAs can actually potentially reduce, and this actually makes your export more competitive as compared to exporters from non-FTA partner countries. Next slide, please. Okay, so I thought it would be useful to share an overview of the tariff commitments under the RCEP. So over here, you can see that around 98% of the tariff are actually eliminated or reduced across all RCEP parties. Taking note that the percentage actually differs across markets like Singapore, Brunei, and Australia, whereby they are already close to 100%. And some of the least developed countries like Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar had committed to a lower level of tariff liberalization. Next slide, please. So this is a broad snapshot of RCEP tariff liberalization amongst the ASEAN FTA partners as well. So the tariff elimination and reduction schedule of individual RCEP country actually starts from the first year that RCEP is applied upon the start of each country implementation date. So as the agreement has already entered into force for certain RCEP economies last year, the tariff elimination and actually reduction schedules has also taken place. For later, I will share with you on the tariff finder tool. So you can actually always use the tariff finder tool to check on the preferential tariff for your product. Or not to worry, because the slides will be circulated after the webinar. So over here, this slide, you will see that it's the rules of origin, which you realize that I've mentioned previously a few times. And moving forward, we will always talk about these rules of origin, as it is actually vital and important for you to know that your products has to meet certain origin criteria in order to obtain the preferential import duties. And in short, rules of origins, they are rules that help to determine if your product is made in any of the RCEP region, as it is only these products that upon importation into another RCEP country, then they will have their import duties eliminated or reduced. And like I mentioned earlier on, this unlocking of tariff saving actually make your product more price competitive, as this cheaper pricing could allow an increase in businesses for both you and your businesses. So next slide. Previous slide. Sorry, I just want to add also that it is also essential that you are aware of how your goods can qualify as an originating product, whereby Singapore Customs will share more tomorrow in tomorrow webinar, and also what documents that actually are needed for you and your importer to check to prove your product origin status as well. So join us in tomorrow webinar too. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, so just now Liz also mentioned like because of the 50 economies, there's like spaghetti bowls. So the RCEP has this single set of rules of origin. So for just now I mentioned on one, how the goods can qualify as an originating product. So for the how, if you look over here in this slide, there are actually three regimes that your product can qualify as an originating goods under the RCEP. So first, which is the wholly obtained goods. And these are actually goods such as vegetable grown in Singapore and export by Singapore companies, or fish grown in Singapore and also export by Singapore companies. Second, you will see that goods, they are actually produced exclusively in RCEP countries from one or more of the RCEP countries. And these are goods that are solely made in the region itself. And the last one will be on the goods that are produced in RCEP country using non-originating materials from one or more RCEP countries. And this is what we actually call the PSR, which is the product specific rules. And under the product specific rules for RCEP, there are three types. One is the regional value content. In short, we call it the RVC criteria. And two is the change in tariff classification, which is CTC, or the product actually undergo specific processes, which we call it the CR, the chemical rule. So taking note that at the bottom, there's also some additional requirement on the tariff differential, which I will share more later on. Not forgetting that Ministry of Trade and Industry, they have actually published this RCEP booklet that actually also further explain all these criteria. We will share the details later, whereby you where you can find the guidebook. Next slide. So as mentioned earlier, businesses often need to use like multiple FTAs to meet different rules and criteria across different supply chain. And RCEP harmonize these qualifying rules across the entire 15 economies. So with RCEP, actually businesses can expect the following across the 15 economies, such as like greater supply chain flexibility in order to accumulate your raw materials, one single unified set of rules of origin to fulfill, whereby this actually simplified the procedures in determining the originating materials and obtaining the documentary proof, and lower risk of non-compliance or errors when claiming preferential duties. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of some gains in the product-specific rules between RCEP and also ASEAN Plus FTA. So companies should try to make use of the tariff finder tool and then find out about the preferential access for your product, and also the relevant rules of origin between RCEP and also the ASEAN Plus FTAs. Next slide, please. So just now if you recall those slides before, that there is this tariff differential. So tariff differential is a newer concept in FTAs. And in RCEP, there are 7 economies, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Australia, China, Japan, and South Korea. So these economies, they will actually grant different custom duties for the same category of goods that are imported from different RCEP countries. So in other words, depending on the RCEP country of origin, the custom duties for similar goods could differ. However, if upon checking, if your goods are actually subjected to tariff differential, businesses, you can actually consider whether the use of other FTA might be more beneficial. That means that instead of looking at RCEP, you might consider looking into ASEAN Plus FTAs. Okay, so allow me to share on how RCEP can increase your price competitiveness in the next 2 examples. So number one, taking sesame soya sauce with a HS code of 21039029 to our neighbor Vietnam. And right now, the custom duties is at 30%. Which is what we usually call it the MFN rate. So MFN stands for most favored nation. So meaning to say that without an FTA in place, the I think 140 economies who are members of the World Trade Organization, when they imports their goods into Vietnam, they will be charged with a 30% custom duties. So as you see below in my chart, you will see and then if the companies consider these without an FTA in place. However, if the in short of origin, then this can be reduced. Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Ivy.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I think there's some internet connectivity issues. I think we have the participants back online as well. I apologize for this inconvenient cause. Yeah. Can I check all the participants? You can hear me? Okay,
Yeah,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, sorry. Let me repeat these slides again. Okay. No problem. I apologize for the inconvenience. So okay, so I was sharing that I would like to take two examples to share about how RCEP can increase your price competitiveness. So regarding this taking example, if I'm going to export a sesame, okay, I manufacture sesame soya sauce oil with a HS code of 2103 9029 to our neighbor country, which is Vietnam. So right now, with Vietnam, there is this custom duties of a 30%, and in short, we call it a most favored nation. So what is this most favored nation about? So it is like whereby in the 140 members of the World Trade Organization, so when they export goods into from their country into Vietnam, their importer will have to pay a 30% import duty if there isn't an FTA in place. However, businesses can check with the FTA in place, such as like example RCEP, example ATIGA. You will notice that in this table, you will see that the import duty is actually reduced to 0. So taking example whereby you have this export value of $500,000, your importer in Vietnam without an FTA in place, he has to pay a custom duties of $150,000. And with RCEP and ATIGA in place, and if this sesame soya sauce oil can meet the rules of origin, then it can roll. So in this sense, right, there is a saving of $150,000, and this is also why it makes your goods more competitive advantage as compared to other countries that doesn't have an FTA with Vietnam. Next slide, please. So in order to enjoy the tariff saving, the sesame oil, soya sauce oil to Vietnam must actually satisfy the respective FTA rules of origin. So for this is the form RCEP. So as you can see at the bottom, it's like a change of from any other heading, original value content of not less than 40%. So this can be extracted from the legal text, or to help the businesses, try using the tariff finder. Next slide, please. Okay, so once your client, once you have a sentence ascertains your product meets the rules of origin of RCEP, then this product can be exported with a form RCEP, we call it, that is issued by Singapore Customs, or you can do a declaration of origin by approved exporter. And in this sense, right, the exporter, you will need to be authorized as an approved exporter under the RCEP, which Singapore Customs will be sharing more about it tomorrow. Next slide, please. So another example I thought might I'll be use this primary cells and primary batteries with a HS code of 8506.80.00.76 to Australia. So right now the custom duties is 5% of the FOB value. Again, this is what we call the most favored nation rate. So meaning to say that taking example from Singapore to Australia is a 5% of FOB. Vietnam to Australia is also a 5% of the FOB. That is without a FTA in place. But with RCEP or another agreement such as the CPTPP, whereby Vietnam and Australia are members of, the import duty again is being eliminated to 0%. So taking that, if the FOB value of this shipment again is a $500,000, your Australian importer will have to pay a $25,000. But as compared with a RCEP and CPTPP in place, then this will be reduced to 0. So again, your importer will have a saving of $25,000. So in order to enjoy again the tariff saving, they must meet the rules of origin, which is the origin criteria to confirm your product is of a RCEP RCEP country. So at the bottom is what I extracted from the legal text. Next slide. And again, you need to get the form, you need to be exported with a form RCEP by Singapore Customs, or a declaration of origin if you are an approved exporter under that is registered with Singapore Customs. Okay, sorry, can you just click all to show all the stages? Thank you very much. Okay, so over here, I thought it might be useful so that to help the businesses understand how they can actually save the custom duties under the RCEP. So number one, you establish the possibility to use RCEP for your goods that is traded. So you need to take note that the final manufacturing location and the importing countries must be our RCEP countries. And step two, you check that your product HS code is actually offer a tariff concessions under RCEP. So the custom duties benefits must be substantial enough for businesses to allocate the internal resources to prepare the required documentation that will satisfy the RCEP rules of origin. Step three, you need, like I mentioned, rules of origin. What are they? Origin criteria that your products needs to meet in order to obtain RCEP origin. So in this sense, like businesses, you have to allocate internal resources and or develop work processes to ensure that your product meets the RCEP rules of origin. And it is very essential and vital that the businesses need and the rules of origin, and then you have to start preparing the supporting documents to apply for the preferential documents. And not only that, all the inputs from the relevant stakeholders are to be prepared properly as well and in a timely manner to use the RCEP. And this will include materials such as bill of materials of the finished goods, your financial accounting records specific to the finished goods, and also the correct HS code. In short, also, HS code is the harmonized system codes. Okay, then for the step 4, you have to, like I mentioned, you prepare already. Then next, you now have to gather in order to prove the origin status. You obtain the proof of origin and connection issue back again. Okay, so I was mentioning the last step about the monitor your supply chain. As I mentioned, that the supply chains can actually in the source of raw materials. So businesses should regularly monitor whether your supply chain setup continue to meet actually the RCEP qualifying rules. So if the supply chain setups no longer meet the RCEP qualifying rules, businesses should either study whether there is a business case or to return to fulfilling the RCEP qualifying rules, or use other FTAs like ASEAN Plus FTA if appropriate and possible. Next slide. So I thought it would be useful to share some of the business model applicable to RCEP. The direct shipments. The direct consignment rules actually allows originating goods to be transported through both signatory countries or non-RCEP signatory countries. However, the goods must remain under customs supervision and must not undergo any further processing except for loading and unloading purposes in this intermediate destinations. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. So, next, RCEP also allows for the issuance of back-to-back proof of origin, whereby and this is actually general similar to the current existing ASEAN FTAs. And the back-to-back proof of origin can be issued in a of the intermediate country, example like Singapore in this slide. And the whole back-to-back shipment is actually essential for the wholesale traders and third-party logistics service providers operating regional distribution centers in Singapore to preserve RCEP originating status. So Singapore Customs will be sharing more about this tomorrow. Hello, can you all hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you better now.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm so sorry again for the interruption. So the next business model I would like to share is on the third-party invoicing. So the RCEP also allows the third-party invoicing of the transaction as long as the goods meets the origin criteria. And the third party that receive the invoice may or may not be an RCEP country. And this is also similar. This provision can also be found in ASEAN Plus FTA. Next slide. So with regards to the non-tariff measures related provisions, or in short, we call it the NTM, RCEPs also provide stronger disciplines as compared to other ASEAN Plus FTA. Like for instance, RCEP actually provides a horizontal consultation mechanism that actually facilitates parties entering into consultation to help and resolve or address the NTM issues. There are also disciplines on quantitative restrictions or import licensing procedures that provide more transparency on any measures or any NTMs that adopted. Next slide. So RCEP also provides certainty on duty-free entry of certain goods, like temporary emissions of goods, duty-free entry of goods into custom territory of RCEP parties that are meant for re-exportation within a specific period, temporary emissions for containers and pallets to be used in shipment of goods in international traffic, and duty-free entry of, example, exhibition. Duty-free entry to samples is also made available. So next slide. So I mentioned earlier that instead of analyzing the RCEP legal text for the latest applicable preferential custom duties, Singapore companies may use the tariff finder offered by Enterprise Singapore. And the tariff finder tool can actually be accessed via Enterprise Singapore website, which I will be sharing broadly in the next few slides. Next slide. So to access the tariff finder, you can navigate to tariff finder page on www.enterprisesg.gov.sg/FTA from the left panel, or you can actually scan the QR code provided. Then, next slide. So over here, you can actually register for a tariff finder. All you need is a corporate email address, and all you need is also your company UEN number. So in case you are not aware of your company UEN number, you can go to www.uen.gov.sg. So just to take note that tariff finder is a service and trade facility tools exclusively for only Singapore-based company. So in case you are in a business trip, and maybe perhaps you're in Malaysia, and then you will have difficulty to access tariff finder because they will check your IP address and ensure that you are located in Singapore before you can use the tariff finder. And as I use tariff finder on a daily basis, I would recommend all to actually save your tariff finder and bookmark it to your Chrome or your IE so that you can access it easily. Next slide, please. So once you log in, once you register and you receive the activation email, you can actually click on the link and then start activate your tariff finder and start navigating it. Next slide. So you will see that in the tariff finder, right at the top, you will see two logos. So the look and feel is like the Enterprise Singapore, but the vendor is actually Mandel, which is a German-based company that Enterprise Singapore has worked with for years, whereby they are specialized information service and data content provider in the field of global customs and foreign trade measures. So tariff finder has been in place since 2017, and to date, there are quite sizable numbers of companies using it already. So over here, when you log into tariff finder, you will see the tariff finders, they have 4 modules. So over here, you will see that the nomenclature whereby you can search for your product HS code. And the tariff and taxes is where you can search for the MFN rate. You can search for the preferential rates under a free trade agreement. And the rules of origin, which I've mentioning it from the start of my slides, is like, you can find the rules of origin for your product under the various FTAs. And then the last module is the import and export formality, which I personally find very useful because we have companies who come to us and share that, hey, I need to understand some of the import formalities for my product at particular, like maybe in Vietnam. So where can I find it? You can also use tariff finder as they have a excuse me, high level of information of import procedures and information over there, whereby you can use it as a benchmark and then checking with your importers. Next slide. So I'm not going through the this video to share how you can use tariff finder, but the slides will be circulated after the webinar so that you can look into this video at your own time, own target. So before I end off my sharing, I thought I mentioned that I want to share on the FTA resources. So if you're someone who loves to read lengthy legal texts, you can go to our www.fta.gov.sg. You will see all the Singapore network of FTAs inside there with all the legal texts there. So if you can also look into the schedules, but it might be better for you to look into the tariff finder to find the relevant information. Then if not, you can join SBF mailing list so that you can keep up to date with our FTA events. Next slide. And I think it's something very important that from Singapore Customs, whereby the circulars or the notice from Singapore Customs, as they are our competent authorities, and they are also the one issuing the preferential certificate origin for certain free trade agreements. They are also the authorities for like, rules of origin and also for minimal process operations and processing. So you can find all this information in Singapore Customs website as well. Then again, Tariff Finder, you can just sign up. It's free, complimentary for Singapore businesses. Remember, like I say, as long as you have a corporate email address and a UEN number of your company, then you can have an account for it. And not forgetting that not only you can sign up, actually, in fact, your entire company, your employees all can sign up for it. There is no limitation to, how many companies can do it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm also sharing with you the Market Readiness Assistance, which is the MRA grant, which is it will be valid until 31st March this year. So inside, companies can actually tap on, can check, and then there is a list of in the FTA consultancy firms that they can actually assist you onto, step-by-steps into your FTA journey. Then next, SPF, we actually publish a few resources. One of them is this Trade in Goods guidebook, which actually provide detailed step-by-steps on how you can navigate free trade agreement. So lastly, for this RCEP booklet, I mentioned a few times earlier that MTI has actually produced RCEP booklet on goods, rules and origin. They actually also produce booklets on in services, investments, and intellectual property IP. So which you can find it in MTI website, or you can scan this QR code to lead to the resources. Next slide. Yeah, so I just want to share that what SBF FTA team does here, we actually conduct seminars, webinars, workshop relating to free trade agreement. It can be FTA per se, like this that we are doing right now, and it can also be industry per se. We also provide complimentary free trade agreement advisory for our business committee. So you can drop us an email at fta@sbf.org.sg. So thank you very much for taking time out to tune into our webinar. I shall hand over the floor to Rahini for the Q&A session, and apologize for the intermittent disruption. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ivy, for your very informative sharing. I'm sure it's very helpful for the businesses to understand better about the RCEP agreement. So now let's move on to the Q&A session of the webinar. But before that, we would like to launch the feedback poll. We appreciate your views on this webinar so that we can further improve on upcoming events. Okay, so we will start with the question and answer session with Liz. So Liz, we would like to ask you how much of the RCEP agreement is actually based on existing FTAs, and how much of the new commitments are to freeing up trades?
Thanks very much, Rahini, and thank you for the question. So it is not it's not an easy question to answer because it depends on the different chapters and it depends on the issues. Basically, as I pointed out earlier, if you're talking about what is new for ASEAN, then that will be the 3 chapters that I highlighted in the slide, because ASEAN doesn't have any government procurement as an ASEAN entity. However, ASEAN members who are part of the CPTPP, for example, Malaysia and Vietnam, because there are strong government procurement provisions in the CPTPP, both of them already be having government procurement provisions. So, that's why it is not so easy. It's not comparing apples and apples. You need to really see on the market, for that market, that country, which FTA they are part of, and then what is it that is new that RCEP is bringing for them. But if you look generally, it will be these 3 new issues that are not fully covered in any of the ASEAN agreements or the ASEAN +1 dialogue member agreements. Some improvements have been taking place in the UNSPATA upgrade, for which we will come back and also do an outreach session once all of this has been finalized and ready to be made public. So I'm sorry, I don't have an easy answer for you. So that's why I said in the key takeaways, you really need to see what works for you and to see how to customize what is relevant for you and for which FTA makes the most sense depending on your business interest and competitive advantage that you're seeking to have.
Thank you, Liz, for the answer. I'm sure that would have clarified things for the participants. Ivy, the next question is for you. So there's this company in Singapore, but their cargo comes from a different country of origin. So how can they actually take advantage of this FTA?
Thanks, Rakini, for the question. So I think that if you are a wholesaler trader in Singapore, like perhaps doing drop shipping, your company can actually choose from a wide pool of third-party manufacturers that are based in one or the more of the RCEP economies in order to enjoy the preferential custom duties for eventual exports into another RCEP countries. And your third-party manufacturers will also have the flexibility in procuring raw materials from any of the RCEP country. And this actually enhance the ability to manufacture goods that will qualify as origin and enjoy the preferential duties under RCEP. So long as your goods meets the RCEP rules of origin, even if the goods are not actually physically shipped through Singapore. On the other hand, if you are a wholesaler in Singapore, whereby you have a regional distribution hub in Singapore, your company can still also select from a wide pool of third-party manufacturers in the RCEP economies, and you can actually accumulate all these origin content and qualify for preferential custom duties when exporting into final market in the RCEP countries. I think your country can also consolidate all RCEP's originating goods from your third-party manufacturer based in RCEP countries and then move to Singapore distribution hub before subsequently you re-export the goods to the buyer in other RCEP countries. This is similar to what I have actually shared on the applicable model under RCEP, which is the back-to-back provision, which Singapore Customs will share more tomorrow. Thank you, Rahimi. Yep.
Answer. So Liz, the next question is for you. So what are the pitfalls to watch for RCEP and the effective date to use for cross-border transactions?
Okay, the pitfalls is, so you have to be very clear, as Ivy has explained, let's just focus on trading goods, that when you are looking to qualify as an originating good, that you're just looking at the goods you are sourcing or incorporating that only come from the RCEP member countries. So you cannot at this point in time include Indian originating content because India is not part of RCEP. So this is why you need to be very careful and your due diligence as to see how you're doing your either manufacturing in Singapore, sourcing in Singapore, or as Ivy just addressed in the other question, your distribution through Singapore, or even if it's not through Singapore, what you're doing, it has to be only amongst the 14 RCEP parties. I will just use this opportunity to answer a question for Raj on the Q&A. Joey on the Q&A, where we mentioned 2 RCPs are pending. That was as of January. So now the 2 was Indonesia and Philippines. Indonesia has already entered into force for them. So we are only waiting for Philippines now. So that's why in the pitfalls, and then you must be very clear what the rules are. As I said, we have not done a cut and paste. So what you may be very familiar with using Artiga Form D, it may not be exactly the same in RCEP. So you do need to check, because this is the pitfalls, I think, from the user is that you just, you assume it's the same and then you face problems later on. So please check on that. For those of you who have been doing a lot of exports with, example, Korea, you will know that Korean customs can be very, very careful when they're checking your claim. So just be aware of things like this as well.
Okay, thank you, Liz, for the information. So I will pose the last question to Ivy on the various FTAs already implemented. So how will RCEP be export facilitating amidst these various FTAs?
Yeah, thanks, Rakini. So I think something that we need to be clear on is that RCEP is not here to replace any of the existing ASEAN Plus FTA. Actually, in fact, RCEP offers an alternative to the existing ASEAN FTA, like what I have mentioned in my slides. Not forgetting that Singapore, we have a wide network of 28 FTAs and counting, whereby Singapore businesses, you have the various choices, the flexibilities, and opportunities to look at all these FTA. And like I say, it is very important that you need to check, and then you compare your RCEP tariff schedules against other ASEAN Plus FTAs. Then after that, you also need to look at the rules of origin to determine like which FTA will give you the most preferential tariff, give the easiest rules of origin for your product to meet. So these are something that company needs to take note and then put in mind when they start using the free trade agreements.
Thank you, Ivy, for the explanation. And this, thank you to both you and Liz for answering to the questions posed. We have quite a few questions in the Q&A box, but not to worry, these questions will also be answered via email, or some of the questions will also be answered by the customs presentation tomorrow as well. Yeah, so please feel free to email us at sta@sdf.org.sg if you have any further questions beyond this webinar as well. So we would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for joining this webinar, including our speakers as well. We apologize for the intermittent muting previously. So we hope you're able to join us tomorrow for Singapore Customs sharing on the rules of origin, as well as customs procedure and trade facilitations chapter. Thank you, everyone.